A morning of prejudice. The city of Liberty Heights was bustling as always, its towering skyscrapers gleaming under the morning sun. Monarch Savings and Trust, one of the most prestigious banks in the city, sat prominently on a corner of the financial district. Inside its grand lobby, newly hired bank teller Cindy Watkins prepared for what she thought would be another uneventful day. Cindy, just a week into her job, had a sharp appearance. Her uniform was pressed, her hair neatly styled, and her station organized to perfection. But her demeanor was far from inviting. Known among her coworkers for her quick judgments and sharp tongue, Cindy had yet to learn the true essence of customer service. By 10:00 a.m., the bank was already teeming with customers. Businessmen in tailored suits, retirees making deposits, and young families opening accounts created a steady hum of activity. Amidst this crowd entered Marcus Brown, a black man in his late 30s. Marcus was dressed simply, jeans, sneakers, and a navy blue t-shirt, but carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had weathered many storms. Though his attire gave no hint of it, Marcus was one of Liberty Heights' most successful entrepreneurs. As the founder and CEO of Liberty Heights Holdings, a multi-million-dollar real estate firm, he had built his empire from the ground up, turning his humble beginnings into a story of triumph. He preferred to keep a low profile, avoiding the limelight that often came with wealth. Marcus approached Cindy's station with a polite smile, sliding a check and his bank card across the counter. "Good morning," he greeted warmly. "I'd like to make a deposit." Cindy glanced up briefly, her eyes flickering over his casual attire before returning to the computer screen. Her expression hardened, and her lips curled into a subtle smirk. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" she asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. Marcus blinked, taken aback, but maintaining his composure. "Yes, I'm sure," he replied calmly. "It's a deposit for my account." Cindy picked up the check, her eyebrows shooting up when she saw the amount. $100 million. Her gaze shifted back to Marcus, skepticism etched into her features. $100 million, she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You're joking, right?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied, his tone still polite. "It's a legitimate check. You're welcome to verify it." Cindy snorted, leaning back in her chair. "Right, $100 million. And I suppose next you'll tell me you're some kind of billionaire." Marcus sighed, realizing where this was headed. He pulled out his business card and slid it across the counter. "This might clear up any confusion," he said patiently. Cindy glanced at the card, but didn't pick it up. Instead, she crossed her arms, her voice dripping with condescension. "I don't need to see that. You people come in here all the time, trying to pull stunts like this. It's not going to work." A few nearby customers turned their heads, drawn by the rising tension. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares, but refused to let the situation escalate. "Ma'am, I assure you—" "Get out," Cindy interrupted, her voice sharp, "before I call security." Marcus held her gaze, his expression calm but firm. "I'm not going anywhere. I have every right to be here." Before Cindy could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her. Daniel Harper, the bank manager, emerged from his office, his sharp suit and confident stride commanding attention. He had noticed the commotion and hurried over, his brow furrowed in concern. "What seems to be the problem here?" Daniel asked, his tone even but firm. Marcus turned to face him, extending a hand. "Good morning, Mr. Harper. I was trying to deposit this check, but your teller seems to think I'm a scammer." Daniel's eyes widened as he recognized Marcus. "Mr. Brown," he said quickly, shaking Marcus's hand. "It's a pleasure to see you. I'm so sorry about this misunderstanding." Cindy froze, her smug expression faltering as she looked between Marcus and Daniel. "Wait, you know him?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Daniel turned to her, his expression darkening. "Know him?" "Cindy, this is Marcus Brown, the owner of Liberty Heights Holdings and our largest client. His investments keep this bank afloat." Cindy's face drained of color. I didn't know. Ignorance is no excuse, Daniel snapped. Your behavior is unacceptable. You've embarrassed this bank and disrespected one of our most valued clients. Cindy opened her mouth to protest, but quickly closed it, realizing she had no defense. The weight of Daniel's words sank in, and her shoulders slumped. Daniel turned back to Marcus, his tone apologetic. Mr. Brown, I deeply regret this incident. Please, let me personally assist you with your deposit. Marcus nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. Thank you, Mr. Harper. I appreciate that. As Daniel led Marcus to his office, Cindy stood frozen at her station, the reality of her actions hitting her like a ton of bricks. Whispers spread among the customers and staff, their judgmental glances making her feel small. In the privacy of his office, Daniel processed Marcus's deposit with the utmost professionalism, ensuring the transaction was smooth and seamless. If there's anything else we can do to make this right, please don't hesitate to let me know, Daniel said as he handed Marcus a receipt. Marcus gave a small smile. Thank you, Mr. Harper. I trust this won't happen again. It won't, Daniel promised. As Marcus left the bank, his steps steady and composed, Cindy watched from her station, a sinking feeling settling in her chest. She had made a terrible mistake, one that would cost her dearly. And yet for Marcus, this was just the beginning. The encounter had sparked something within him, a determination to address the biases and systemic issues that allowed such incidents to occur. Little did Cindy know, her actions would set off a chain of events that would ripple far beyond the walls of the bank, transforming lives and challenging the status quo. A ripple of consequences. As Marcus Brown exited Monarch Savings and Trust, he couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. He had faced subtle and not so subtle prejudice before, but there was something about this encounter that struck a nerve. It wasn't the first time someone had dismissed him based on his appearance, but the sheer audacity of the situation, the fact that it occurred in a professional setting, no less, left him with a sour taste in his mouth. The warm sunlight outside the bank felt at odds with the cold treatment he had just received. As Marcus walked to his car, a sleek yet understated black sedan, he resolved not to let the experience slide. Monarch Savings and Trust wasn't just any bank. It was a cornerstone of the city's financial ecosystem, and as one of its most significant clients, Marcus knew he had the power to demand accountability. Back inside the bank, Cindy Watkins stood at her counter, still reeling from the reprimand she had received. Whispers and glances from her colleagues and customers made her shift uncomfortably. Her mind raced with questions. How could I have known who he was? Was I really that out of line? But deep down, she knew the answer. Her rash judgment had humiliated not only Marcus, but also herself and the bank. Daniel Harper, the bank manager, wasted no time in addressing the situation. After escorting Marcus out with a profuse apology, he returned to the floor and approached Cindy. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a sternness that made Cindy's stomach churn. Cindy, Daniel said, his voice low but firm. My office. Now. She hesitated, looking around for support, but none of her colleagues met her gaze. They all seemed to be avoiding her, as though her disgrace might be contagious. With a deep breath, she followed Daniel into his office, the door closing behind them with a soft click. Daniel didn't waste time with pleasantries. Do you have any idea how serious this is? He began, leaning forward on his desk. Your behavior today was not only unprofessional, but also insulting. Mr. Brown is one of our largest clients. Without his investments, this bank wouldn't function as it does. Cindy squirmed in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I didn't know, she muttered. He didn't look like. Stop right there, Daniel interrupted sharply. I don't care what you thought he looked like. You judged a customer based on nothing more than his appearance. And worse, you dismissed him without even verifying his credentials. That's not just poor service. It's prejudice, plain and simple. Cindy's face flushed with embarrassment. I didn't mean to. You did, Daniel cut in. Intentions don't matter when the outcome is this damaging. Do you know what this could mean for the bank's reputation if Mr. Brown decided to go public with his experience? We're not just talking about bad PR. We're talking about a potential lawsuit. Cindy's heart sank further. I didn't realize, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. Cindy, you've been here for a week. I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt, but this incident leaves me no choice. Pack your things. Your employment with Monarch Savings and Trust is terminated, effective immediately. Her breath caught in her throat. Please, Mr. Harper, she pleaded. I can do better. I'll prove myself. Just give me another chance. But Daniel's expression remained resolute. This isn't just about you, Cindy. It's about what you represent to our clients and our employees. You've undermined the trust people have in this institution, and that's not something I can overlook. With that, he stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Cindy left his office in a daze, her vision blurring with unused tears as she gathered her belongings and walked out of the bank. The door that closed behind her felt as final as a judge's gavel, a call to action. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his office at Liberty Heights Holdings, his thoughts still lingering on the encounter. He couldn't shake the image of Cindy's dismissive smirk or the way she had waved him off without so much as checking his credentials. It wasn't the insult to his wealth or status that bothered him most. It was the realization that her attitude was likely a symptom of a much larger problem. Sitting at his desk, Marcus picked up his phone and dialed the number of his personal assistant, Sophia Green. Sophia, he said when she answered, I need you to schedule a meeting with Monarch Savings and Trust's Board of Directors. As soon as possible. Sophia, ever efficient, didn't waste time with questions. Of course, Mr. Brown. Is there anything specific you'd like me to prepare for the meeting? Yes, Marcus replied, his voice firm. I want a full breakdown of our financial contributions to the bank. I also want a report on their corporate social responsibility initiatives, particularly anything related to diversity and inclusion. Sophia paused, sensing the gravity of his tone. Understood. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning. As he ended the call, Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This wasn't just about demanding an apology or ensuring Cindy faced consequences. This was about holding Monarch Savings and Trust accountable for the culture that allowed such behavior to persist. If they wanted to keep his business, they would need to prove they were committed to change. The boardroom reckoning. 2 days later, Marcus found himself seated in the boardroom of Monarch Savings and Trust, facing the bank's top executives, including Daniel Harper and the CEO, Amanda Klein. The atmosphere was tense, the usual corporate confidence tempered by the knowledge that Marcus held all the cards. Mr. Brown, Amanda began, her tone conciliatory. First, let me extend our deepest apologies for the unacceptable experience you had at our branch. We take these matters very seriously, and I assure you, the employee responsible has been terminated. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. I appreciate that, Ms. Klein. But firing one employee isn't enough. This isn't just about one person's actions. It's about the culture that allowed it to happen. Amanda shifted uncomfortably, while Daniel looked on with a mix of respect and apprehension. What would you suggest, Mr. Brown? Amanda asked cautiously. I want to see real change, Marcus replied. I want to know what steps you're taking to ensure this doesn't happen again, not just to me, but to anyone who walks into one of your branches. Amanda nodded, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine concern. We're committed to addressing this, Mr. Brown. If you have specific recommendations, we're more than willing to listen. Marcus leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. I expect comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training for all employees, starting with your leadership team. I want to see an increase in hiring and promotion opportunities for underrepresented groups. And I want regular audits of your customer service practices to ensure accountability. Amanda exchanged a glance with Daniel, who nodded subtly. "Those are reasonable and necessary changes," Amanda said. "We'll begin implementing them immediately." Marcus stood, extending a hand. "Good. I look forward to seeing the results." As Marcus left the boardroom, he felt a sense of accomplishment, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed or underestimated. This wasn't just about a bank or a single employee. It was about setting a standard for how people deserve to be treated. And for Marcus, it was just the beginning of a much larger fight for justice and equality. The ripple effect. Marcus Brown's confrontation with the board of Monarch Savings and Trust sent shockwaves through the bank's upper echelons. The institution, long known for its polished reputation, suddenly found itself under scrutiny. The story of the encounter between Marcus and the teller, Cindy Watkins, began to circulate, not because Marcus publicized it, but because whispers of the incident had already spread among bank employees and customers who had witnessed the debacle. Within days, the story leaked to the local press, turning the bank's internal crisis into a public relations nightmare. The power of social media. By the end of the week, a local journalist broke the story, highlighting not only Marcus's stature as a successful entrepreneur, but also the underlying issues of bias and prejudice within the banking industry. A tweet summarizing the incident. "Black millionaire dismissed as a scammer by bank teller. What does this say about implicit bias in finance?" quickly went viral, sparking outrage and debate. Comments flooded in, with some sharing similar experiences of being judged based on their appearance, while others condemned the teller's actions and questioned the bank's practices. The incident struck a chord, not just in Liberty Heights but across the country, as people from all walks of life related to the broader theme of systemic discrimination. Marcus, however, remained quiet publicly. He wasn't interested in a media spectacle. His focus was on driving real change. But as the story gained traction, he realized it was an opportunity to amplify the message. He contacted his team at Liberty Heights Holdings and asked them to craft a thoughtful statement addressing the situation. Marcus speaks out. A few days later, Marcus posted a video on his company's social media platforms. Sitting in his office, dressed in his signature understated style, he spoke directly to the camera. "I didn't share this story to shame anyone," he began. "But what happened to me at Monarch Savings and Trust is part of a much larger issue. Bias, whether conscious or unconscious, impacts how people are treated every day. And it's time we confront it head-on." He paused, his tone calm but resolute. "I don't want an apology. I want action. Not just from Monarch Savings and Trust, but from every institution that claims to serve the public. This isn't about me. It's about the countless individuals who don't have the platform or resources to fight back when they're mistreated. It's about creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or where they come from." The video garnered millions of views within hours, with thousands of comments expressing support and sharing similar stories. Marcus's measured response elevated the conversation beyond the specifics of his experience, turning it into a rallying cry for change. Back at Monarch Savings and Trust. Inside the walls of Monarch Savings and Trust, the atmosphere was tense. Employees were well aware of the controversy, and many feared the fallout could jeopardize their jobs. The leadership team, spearheaded by CEO Amanda Klein, scrambled to address the situation. They knew that firing Cindy Watkins wasn't enough. The bank's reputation was at stake, and customers were already threatening to close their accounts in protest. Amanda called an emergency meeting with the board, Daniel Harper, and the bank's public relations team. "This isn't just a PR issue," she said, her voice firm. "This is about the very foundation of our company's values. If we don't take meaningful action now, we'll lose the trust of our clients and our community." The group brainstormed a series of initiatives, including mandatory diversity training, a review of hiring practices, and the establishment of an internal committee to address bias and discrimination. But Amanda knew these measures would take time to implement. In the short term, the bank needed to show a tangible commitment to change. "We need a public apology," Amanda said. addressing the room. Not just a generic statement. We need to own our mistakes and outline exactly how we plan to fix them. A public apology. The next morning, Amanda appeared on local news alongside Daniel Harper to address the incident. "What happened to Mr. Marcus Brown at our bank was unacceptable," she began. "As an institution that prides itself on serving our community, we failed to live up to our values. We want to publicly apologize to Mr. Brown and to anyone else who has ever been made to feel unwelcome or disrespected in one of our branches." Daniel added, "We recognize that this issue goes beyond one employee's actions. As leaders, it's our responsibility to create an environment where every customer is treated with respect. To that end, we're launching a comprehensive review of our policies and implementing mandatory training for all employees to ensure this never happens again." The apology was well received by some but criticized by others as too little too late. Nevertheless, it marked the beginning of a larger transformation within the bank. Cindy's reflection. Meanwhile, Cindy Watkins was struggling to move on from the fallout of her actions. Losing her job had been a harsh wake-up call, but it wasn't the only consequence. Her friends distanced themselves, and her family expressed disappointment in her behavior. She became a target of online criticism after the story went viral, with strangers condemning her actions and questioning her character. At first, Cindy was defensive, blaming Marcus and her former employer for her predicament. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to reflect on her behavior. She watched Marcus's video and read the stories of others who had experienced similar treatment, and for the first time, she saw herself through their eyes. The realization was painful but necessary. Determined to make amends, Cindy reached out to a local community organization that focused on racial equity and anti-bias education. She began attending workshops and volunteering her time, hoping to learn from her mistakes and contribute to meaningful change. A turning point. Back at Liberty Heights Holdings, Marcus received an email from Cindy. In it, she apologized for her actions and explained the steps she was taking to educate herself and make amends. "I know I can't undo the harm I caused," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I'm committed to becoming a better person and ensuring I never treat anyone the way I treated you." Marcus read the email carefully, his expression thoughtful. He didn't respond immediately, but he appreciated her sincerity. For him, forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about creating space for growth and change. The broader impact. As weeks turned into months, the incident at Monarch Savings and Trust became a catalyst for broader conversations about bias and accountability. Other companies began implementing similar initiatives, inspired by Marcus's advocacy and the bank's public commitment to change. For Marcus, the experience was a reminder of the power of standing up for what's right. He continued to use his platform to push for equity and inclusion, knowing that real change required ongoing effort. And for Cindy, the incident became a turning point in her life, a painful but transformative lesson about the importance of empathy and understanding. Though her journey was just beginning, she was determined to make it one of redemption and growth. In the end, the story wasn't just about one man's experience or one woman's mistake. It was a testament to the power of accountability, forgiveness, and the belief that even the smallest actions can create ripples of change. The catalyst for change. The public apology from Monarch Savings and Trust was a step in the right direction, but for Marcus Brown, it was far from the end. As a man who had built his fortune on persistence and vision, he knew that systemic change didn't come from words alone. It required action, accountability, and perseverance. With the bank's leadership promising reforms, Marcus decided to take a more active role in ensuring they followed through. Building momentum. Marcus called a meeting with his leadership team at Liberty Heights Holdings. Sitting at the head of a sleek conference table in the company's downtown office, he addressed his team with a sense of urgency. "I've spent the last week thinking about what happened at Monarch Savings and Trust," he began. "This isn't just about me or that one teller. It's about a larger issue that exists not just in banking, but in every industry. We have the resources and influence to do something about it. I want to create a program that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in workplaces, but in communities." Sophia Green, his trusted assistant, raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about something beyond just holding Monarch accountable." "Exactly," Marcus said. "We can use what happened as a case study, a starting point. But I want this to be bigger. We're going to fund workshops, scholarships, and training programs that tackle unconscious bias and promote leadership opportunities for underrepresented groups." The room buzzed with enthusiasm as the team brainstormed ideas. Marcus's vision quickly evolved into what they called the Equity First Initiative, a multifaceted program designed to challenge systemic inequities in professional spaces. The Equity First Initiative. Within weeks, the Equity First Initiative was officially launched. Its mission was simple yet ambitious: to create environments where everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, had equal access to opportunities. Marcus personally pledged $10 million to fund the initiative's first year, with additional contributions coming from his company's profits. The program included unconscious bias training. Partnering with experts, the initiative developed workshops tailored to businesses, helping employees recognize and overcome their biases. Leadership scholarships. Scholarships were offered to young individuals from underrepresented communities, enabling them to pursue higher education and leadership training. Diversity audits. Companies, including Monarch Savings and Trust, were encouraged to participate in voluntary audits to identify and address disparities in their hiring and promotion practices. Community outreach. The initiative also aimed to educate the public through town halls, online webinars, and partnerships with local organizations. Marcus ensured that Monarch Savings and Trust was the first participant in the program. CEO Amanda Klein and Daniel Harper agreed to integrate the Equity First workshops into their employee training, and Marcus pledged to monitor their progress closely. Cindy's path to redemption. For Cindy Watkins, life after her dismissal was anything but easy. Public opinion had turned sharply against her after the story went viral, and she found herself isolated from her former friends and colleagues. But despite the backlash, Cindy refused to wallow in self-pity. Instead, she decided to take Marcus's story and her own mistakes as a lesson. Cindy began attending Equity First workshops, sitting quietly in the back of the room during the initial sessions. She listened intently as facilitators discussed topics like privilege, microaggressions, and the impact of implicit bias. At first, the material made her uncomfortable. It forced her to confront parts of herself she hadn't acknowledged before. But over time, Cindy began to open up, participating in discussions and sharing her experience with others. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Cindy approached the facilitator, a woman named Angela, who was also a former HR executive. "I just want to say thank you," Cindy said, her voice trembling. "These workshops, they've changed the way I see the world and myself." Angela smiled warmly. "Acknowledging where we've gone wrong is the first step toward growth. The fact that you're here, willing to learn, says a lot." Cindy nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I want to do more than just learn. I want to help. Is there any way I can contribute to the program?" Angela hesitated for a moment before replying. "If you're serious, we're always looking for volunteers to help with outreach. It's not easy work, but it's meaningful." Cindy agreed without hesitation, marking the beginning of her journey to not only redeem herself, but also make a positive impact on others. A meeting of minds. A few months later, Marcus received an unexpected email from Cindy. In it, she apologized once again for her actions and explained the steps she had taken since leaving the bank. She shared her experience with the Equity First workshops and her newfound commitment to promoting inclusion and equity. "I know I can't undo the harm I caused," Cindy wrote, "but I'm trying to turn my mistakes into something meaningful. If you'd ever be willing, I'd like to meet and thank you in person for creating this program. It's given me a second chance." Marcus was skeptical at first. He had no obligation to meet with Cindy, and part of him wondered if her transformation was genuine. But after some thought, he decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. He reached out to her and arranged a meeting at his office. When Cindy arrived, she was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the defensive, dismissive woman from the bank. In her place was someone who radiated humility and determination. She sat across from Marcus, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Cindy began. "I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to hear from, but I felt it was important to tell you this in person. I'm sorry for the way I treated you and for the assumptions I made. I was wrong, and I've spent the last few months trying to understand why." Marcus studied her for a moment before responding. "I appreciate your apology, Cindy, but words are only part of the equation. What matters is what you do moving forward." Cindy nodded. "That's why I'm here. I've been volunteering with the Equity First Initiative, and it's changed my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that your work is making a difference." Marcus's expression softened. "It's not about forgiveness, Cindy. It's about growth. If you're willing to put in the work, then you're already on the right path." The ripple expands. As the months went by, the Equity First Initiative gained national attention, with companies from various industries signing on to participate. Monarch Savings and Trust underwent a visible transformation, with employees and customers alike noticing the shift in culture. Marcus continued to oversee the program, ensuring its mission stayed true to its purpose. For Cindy, her work with Equity First became more than just a way to atone for her actions. It became her passion. She eventually took on a full-time role with the organization, traveling to different cities to share her story and facilitate workshops. The encounter at Monarch Savings and Trust had started as a moment of prejudice and humiliation, but it had grown into something far greater, a movement that challenged institutions to do better, empowered individuals to confront their biases, and proved that even the smallest actions could create ripples of change. For Marcus, the journey reaffirmed his belief in the power of perseverance and the importance of using his platform for good. And for Cindy, it was a reminder that while mistakes could not be undone, they could be the foundation for something better. Together, their paths wove a story of redemption, accountability, and the enduring fight for equity. Turning the tide. Months had passed since Marcus Brown's fateful encounter at Monarch Savings and Trust, and the ripple effects of that day were undeniable. What started as a personal affront had grown into a transformative movement that was reshaping not only the bank, but also the broader community. Yet for Marcus, the work was far from over. As the Equity First Initiative gained traction, so did the challenges that came with implementing real systemic change. Cindy's new mission. Cindy Watkins had found a sense of purpose she never thought possible. After months of attending workshops and volunteering with the Equity First Initiative, she had become one of the organization's most dedicated advocates. Her story of judgment, dismissal, and eventual redemption resonated with many, and Cindy had begun speaking at events to share her journey. One such event was held in the heart of Liberty Heights at a packed auditorium filled with corporate leaders, educators, and community members. Cindy stood on stage, nervous but determined, as she recounted her experience. "I'm not proud of who I was," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "That day at the bank, I let my biases guide my actions. I assumed I knew someone's story based on nothing more than how they looked. And I hurt not just Mr. Brown but also myself and the institution I represented." She paused, scanning the audience. "But what I've learned is that it's never too late to change. It's never too late to unlearn what you thought you knew and replace it with understanding and empathy. And I'm standing here today because someone, Mr. Brown, chose to see this as an opportunity for growth, not just punishment." Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and afterward, several attendees approached her to thank her for her honesty. Cindy's transformation had become a powerful symbol of the Equity First Initiative's impact, and it was clear she was determined to use her voice to make a difference. a growing movement. Meanwhile, Marcus was working tirelessly to expand the reach of the Equity First initiative. He had secured partnerships with several major corporations, including tech companies, educational institutions, and even city government agencies. The initiative had become a blueprint for addressing bias and promoting equity in professional environments, and its success had drawn national attention. However, with growth came challenges. As more organizations signed on, Marcus and his team encountered resistance from individuals and institutions unwilling to confront their biases. Some dismissed the initiative as unnecessary, while others actively pushed back against its goals. One such challenge arose when a prominent company in Liberty Heights, Sterling Industries, initially agreed to participate in the initiative, but later stalled on implementing the necessary changes. Marcus decided to address the issue head-on, scheduling a meeting with the company's CEO, Richard Sterling. The meeting with Sterling. Richard Sterling was a man known for his sharp business acumen and reluctance to change. His company had a reputation for traditional practices, and while he had publicly expressed support for the Equity First initiative, his actions suggested otherwise. When Marcus arrived at Sterling Industries headquarters, he was met with polite but guarded reception. Richard greeted him in the boardroom, his tone cordial but distant. "Marcus," Richard began, extending a hand, "I appreciate you coming in. We've been reviewing the initiative, and while we agree with its goals in principle, we're finding it challenging to implement some of the recommendations." Marcus nodded, sensing the resistance beneath Richard's words. "I understand change can be difficult," he replied. "But if we want to create truly inclusive environments, we have to be willing to address the root causes of inequity. That means going beyond surface-level commitments." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Our company has been successful for decades. We've built a culture that works for us. I'm not sure it's necessary to disrupt that." Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "With all due respect, Richard, success doesn't mean perfection. The question isn't whether your culture works, it's whether it works for everyone. How many voices have been excluded because they didn't fit into your definition of success?" The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Marcus's words hanging in the air. Richard seemed to consider this, his posture softening slightly. "I'll admit," Richard said finally, "I hadn't thought about it that way. Maybe it's time I did." A new ally. The conversation with Richard marked a turning point. Over the next few months, Sterling Industries became one of the Equity First initiative's most vocal supporters, implementing sweeping changes that included revamped hiring practices, mentorship programs, and regular diversity audits. Richard himself became an advocate for the initiative, speaking at events alongside Marcus and Cindy. The partnership with Sterling Industries further cemented the initiative's reputation, and soon, other companies began reaching out to join. Marcus's vision was becoming a reality, but he knew the journey was far from over. A moment of reflection. One evening, after a particularly long day, Marcus found himself back at the same gas station where his journey with Monarch Savings and Trust had begun. As he filled his tank, he reflected on how much had changed since that day. He thought about Cindy, now a key member of the Equity First initiative, and how her transformation had inspired others. He thought about the thousands of individuals who had attended workshops, shared their stories, and committed to change. And he thought about the challenges that still lay ahead. As he drove home, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for equity and inclusion wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon. And while the road was long, he was determined to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The bigger picture. For Marcus, Cindy, and everyone involved in the Equity First initiative, the journey was about more than just addressing a single incident. It was about challenging the systems and mindsets that allowed such incidents to occur in the first place. It was about proving that even in the face of resistance, change was possible. And in Liberty Heights, a city that had once seemed unshakable in its traditions, a new narrative was taking shape, one of growth, resilience, and the power of people to create a better future together. A legacy of change. Months turned into a year, and the impact of the incident at Monarch Savings and Trust continued to reverberate across Liberty Heights. The Equity First initiative had become a powerful force for change, influencing not only businesses, but also schools, government agencies, and community organizations. What began as a painful moment of bias had blossomed into a movement that was shifting the culture of an entire city and beyond. A transformational summit. The Equity First initiative reached a significant milestone with the announcement of its first annual Equity and Inclusion Summit. The event, held at the Liberty Heights Convention Center, was set to bring together business leaders, educators, activists, and everyday citizens to discuss strategies for fostering equity in all areas of society. Marcus Brown had envisioned the summit as more than just a conference. It was a celebration of progress and a rallying cry for the work still to be done. The event drew thousands of attendees, including representatives from companies that had embraced the initiative and others eager to learn from its success. Keynote speakers included figures like Richard Sterling, now a vocal advocate for diversity, and Amanda Klein, the CEO of Monarch Savings and Trust, who had implemented transformative changes within her organization. The most anticipated speaker, however, was Cindy Watkins. Her story of redemption had become one of the initiative's most inspiring examples of personal growth and accountability. Cindy's speech. As Cindy stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. Standing before the packed auditorium, she took a deep breath and began. "A little over a year ago," she said, her voice steady, "I made a mistake that changed the course of my life. I judged someone based on their appearance. I dismissed them, insulted them, and refused to give them the respect they deserved. That someone was Marcus Brown, and I stand here today because he chose to turn my mistake into an opportunity for change." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I could have let that moment define me. I could have stayed defensive, blaming everyone but myself. But instead, I chose to confront the hard truths about who I was and how I had been shaped by biases I didn't even realize I carried." Cindy spoke about her journey with the Equity First initiative, the lessons she had learned, and the people she had met who had inspired her to keep growing. This initiative isn't just about fixing systems, it's about fixing ourselves. Because real change starts with each of us choosing to be better, day by day. Her speech ended with a standing ovation, and as she stepped off the stage, Marcus met her with a handshake and a quiet, "Well done." Marcus's vision expands. While the summit marked a moment of celebration, Marcus remained focused on the future. He had seen firsthand how the Equity First initiative could transform businesses and communities, but he also knew its reach needed to extend even further. He began exploring partnerships with national organizations, leveraging his growing network to spread the initiative's message across the country. One of the most significant developments came when a group of educators approached Marcus with a proposal to integrate the initiative's principles into school curriculums. They argued that if children were taught about equity and inclusion from a young age, they could grow up to create a more just and empathetic society. Inspired by the idea, Marcus worked with educators, psychologists, and community leaders to develop a pilot program for local schools. The curriculum included lessons on empathy, cultural awareness, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Within months, the program was rolled out in Liberty Heights public schools, with plans to expand to other districts. A personal moment of reflection. One quiet evening, Marcus found himself back in his office, surrounded by files, reports, and proposals. The weight of his responsibilities was heavy, but so was his sense of purpose. He thought back to that day at Monarch Savings and Trust, the frustration he had felt, and the choice he had made to channel that frustration into something productive. His assistant, Sophia, knocked gently on the door and entered with a cup of tea. "You've been at it all day," she said with a smile. "Take a break, Marcus." He leaned back in his chair, accepting the tea with a grateful nod. "Do you ever think about how much has changed since this all started?" he asked. "All the time," Sophia replied. But what amazes me most is how you've turned something so negative into something so positive. Not many people would have done that. Marcus smiled, his gaze distant. It's not just about me. This is bigger than any one person. It's about proving that change is possible, even when it feels impossible. The ripple effect. The Equity First Initiative's success inspired similar movements in other cities. Marcus began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events, sharing the lessons he had learned and the strategies that had worked. The initiative's model was adopted by organizations across the country, from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Monarch Savings and Trust also became a shining example of transformation. Under Amanda Klein's leadership, the bank had implemented sweeping changes, including new hiring practices, regular employee training, and community outreach programs. Customers who had once threatened to leave now praised the bank for its commitment to growth and accountability. For Cindy, her journey of redemption continued. She became a full-time member of the Equity First Initiative, dedicating her life to helping others confront their biases and embrace change. Her story was often featured in workshops and seminars, a reminder that mistakes didn't have to define a person. They could be the catalyst for something greater. The legacy of a single moment. As the first annual summit drew to a close, Marcus stood on the stage, addressing the audience one last time. Change isn't easy, he said, his voice filled with conviction. It requires courage, persistence, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. But if there's one thing this past year has taught me, it's that change is possible, not just in institutions, but in people. We all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small our actions might seem. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who had been part of this journey. Cindy, Amanda, Richard Sterling, and countless others. This isn't the end, he continued. It's just the beginning. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. And that's a legacy worth fighting for. The audience erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the convention center. For Marcus, it was a moment of triumph, not for himself, but for the movement he had helped create. A movement that proved that even in the face of prejudice and adversity, hope and determination could lead to extraordinary change. And as the crowd stood in unison, it was clear that the ripples of that single moment at Monarch Savings and Trust would continue to spread, shaping a better future for generations to